Hello and welcome to my Floss Tube channel. I'm Jean Farish, and once again we're here together to talk about all kinds of things dealing with needlework. Mostly kind of cross stitch, but a few other things thrown in from here and there. So first of all, it's good to be back, and I am so glad that you're here too. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe. And if you want to get little reminders of when a new episode is available, click on that little bell icon, and that way you'll always get a notification. So the thing I've been working on in the last couple of weeks are some classes coming up. Now, Stitch Point on Friendly Avenue in Greensboro is my local needlework store, and I teach there as often as my schedule permits. And I have 3 or 4 classes coming up this spring and the early part of the summer. Definitely going to be teaching for the first time a how to cross stitch class. I think sometimes I get really comfortable in thinking that everybody already knows the basics, and I'm getting feedback that that's not always the case. And so Patsy, the owner of Stitch Point, has asked me to teach a bare bones beginner class. So if you're interested, I'll put the information in the the episode details about how to contact the shop. Because right now, as of today, I can't tell you the date or even the cost of that class. I'm also going to be teaching my 4-way Bargello class. This is a counted canvas or counted needlepoint technique. It's a whole lot of fun. I do recommend that you get the basic Bargello class first, and then jump into the 4-way. And I've developed a brand new class that's a little small stocking that's a good size for an ornament. And the class will kind of be a 2-part thing: how to stitch the canvas, and then how to make it into an ornament a month or so after the first class. So that one I don't have made into an ornament yet, but I can show you a little sneak peek. So what you're seeing here is this finished canvas stitching, and then I've just put my little stocking template over it so you can get an idea of what the shape is going to look like. So this is a real fun stitch. This is what I call a composite stitch, where it's combining a couple of needlepoint stitches to create the overall effect. And whenever you're photographing, or in this case making a video of the metallic threads, they don't really come across quite as sparkly as they are in real life. So I really like this because it's a combination of something that's sort of delicate, kind of reminds me of those old world glass ornaments. So anyway, that's going to be a whole lot of fun. So that's coming up at Stitch Point. And then the second week in July, not 4th of July weekend, but the one after that, I'm going to be teaching up at Hobby House in Pittsford, New York. And it's going to be kind of a theme of Lady Elizabeth's garden. And I've developed a new project for that one as well. Another little stocking ornament. This one I do have, This one I do have fully finished. Well, 99.9% fully finished. When I got it to this stage, I thought, I think I'd like to add just a couple little jingle bells or something gold right here. So that is coming. And I also think that my tassel is a little bit long. But making tassels is sort of like cutting your bangs. First of all, in one word, professional. When you want your bangs trimmed, go to a professional. But if you're like me and you've done it yourself, they do grow back, but, taking off a little bit at a time is a good idea. But when you're making something like a tassel, it's not going to grow back. So if you cut off too much, the only way to make it longer is to start all over again. So so I'm going to be trimming that, I think, a little bit, and figuring out exactly how long I want to make it. Anyway, that's what I have left to do on that one. Oh, and that class will also be a finishing class. So that's going to be at Hobby House Needleworks up in Pittsford, New York. And before that, though, the spring, I'm teaching in Surfside Beach, which is near Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, at Barefoot Needleart. And I'm going to be teaching one of my really, really favorite things to do, and that's making a 3-dimensional scissor fob. Now, this is fabric that I dyed myself, which was a whole lot of fun. And so that's one of the things that makes this, this class kit unique. And then when you take a class like this, you are more than just putting together that particular class project. You are learning a technique that you can use to put together any kind of a 3-dimensional object. So it's a skill set more than just finishing one project. So this class kit includes the ribbons, all the charms. Now the charms will vary in terms of what's available, but they will all have that kind of tropical or seaside look. And then it can be used either as an ornament or in the what I've done here, and it's used as a scissor fob. So again, that's what's coming up at Barefoot Needleart in Surfside, South Carolina. There are days, I am sure, I spend way too much time on Facebook. But every once in a while, I stumble across a question or a discussion that makes me think it's a topic I need to bring up here. And that's the case with this next thing I want to talk about. And this was not a question that was asked of me directly, but I have seen it asked in many different ways, or sometimes made as a comment. Anyway, the question I want to put before you is, if something is designed to be stitched over 1 on linen, can it be stitched over 2 on linen? Can it be stitched on Aida? And the first part of that answer is yes. If it's stitched over 1 on linen, it can be stitched over 2 on linen, no matter whether it's just cross stitch or cross stitch and back stitch, if there are specialty stitches. If it is designed and marketed to be stitched over 1, you can take that same design and stitch it over 2. And one of the reasons I'm bringing this up is just recently somebody posted and said something about there was a design they really, really, really wanted to stitch, but it was designed as over 1 on 40 count linen, and the person that was just too much for them. Well, it's kind of a shame that they came away with that impression, because they can stitch it over 2 on linen if it's designed to be stitched over 1. And if it's designed for 40 count linen, it can be stitched on 30 count or 28 count or even 18 count. The count is not dictated by the chart. Now, once you get into changing the thread count of the linen, you will also need to adjust perhaps the thread that you're using or the number of strands that you're using. So I will caution that. But I think that designers do their customers a disservice when they come across as if this has to be stitched on this fabric on this count. So I'm just here to tell you that that's not necessarily true. Now, can it be stitched on Aida? Well, that all depends on whether or not if it's just cross stitch and back stitch, then yes, absolutely. You can take any design that's designed or photographed as being stitched on linen, you can stitch it on Aida. Now that also, just as a gentle reminder though, for my Aida stitchers, when you stitch on Aida, you're stitching over 1. Sort of. You're really not, we don't usually use a designation of over 1 or over 2. When you stitch on Aida, you're stitching on Aida. You're stitching 1 cross stitch per Aida square. Now, can you stitch over 2 on Aida? Absolutely. But realize that you're talking about, instead of making an X on 1 Aida square, you're talking about making an X over 4 Aida squares. And I don't really know why anybody would want to do that, but you could if you wanted to. Okay, so here's another one. When does a design have to be done as full coverage? Now, I sort of shy away from the whole full coverage trend. As a designer, it's not my style. I can't sit here and say you'll never see me doing a full coverage project, but you probably won't. I mean, I haven't designed one in over 40 years, so I don't know why I would start now. But just in case, I will leave that door open. But what I want to talk about here, though, are the cases where a person has stitched a beautifully done, let's say, I'm not going to use the actual piece because I don't want to do that. Anyway, just in generic terms. Let's say if somebody did a portrait of a horse, beautifully done, realistic, and it's done on a black background. And they have stitched it on white Aida using black thread for the background. And I'm sitting here at home saying, why did they do that? Why not just stitch the horse on black Aida or black linen or black something or other? That's when I think that the whole full coverage thing has gotten out of whack. If you are attracted to a design and the background is solid, then my recommendation would be find a fabric that's similar to that color and just stitch the main event. Don't stitch the background. It'll save you a lot of time and a lot of aggravation. So that's all I want to say about that. More and more people are feeling comfortable traveling. And of course, with spring right around the corner, I hope, and summer not far behind that, when more people seem to do traveling, I want to readdress the whole question of traveling with your needlework. And that kind of comes up with a couple different categories. First of all, scissors. TSA has some very specific rules, and if you look them up, basically they talk about that the blades can't be longer than 4 inches. Some people interpret that to mean the whole pair of scissors can't be more than 4 inches. And that's frankly a pretty good size for embroidery scissors. But here are the 4 things I want to say. Number 1, do not argue with TSA. If they tell you they have to confiscate the scissors, then you're just going to have to give them over. Recently, I read something of a person saying that they were really careful and they had somebody kind of standing by that they could hand their scissors off to if they went through TSA and were told that they couldn't take them. But I'm going to tell you what, of all the airports I've been at, you wouldn't know that until you're actually through that metal detector and your stuff is through the conveyor. Will they let you at that point take your stuff and go back and then you have to wait in line again? I mean, I don't know. But anyway, I kind of had to ask myself how feasible that is. That's number 1. Number 2, international rules may be different than what we're used to here in the U.S. And this has happened to people where they have taken off in New York or Atlanta or Los Angeles. And so the first leg of their trip, they went through TSA. And then when they're coming home from a foreign country. And those exact same scissors that went through without a blip in the U.S. are suddenly confiscated. Don't be surprised. These rules are not international. And as I have said before in other episodes, we need to be aware of the fact that if something happens, if there's some incident somewhere, then the rules can change in a nanosecond. Number 3, don't take any scissors that you're not willing to lose. Bottom line. My favorite scissors to travel with, and I've shown these to you before, and I'm sure that you have seen them. Just about every needlework store has these by the cash register as sort of like just a little impulse buy. And they're, I'm not gonna, they're under $5. I mean, and they're the little case is attached. They're tiny, they're sharp, and if they should be taken, you're only out a couple bucks. You haven't lost like your favorite stork scissors. Number 4, ignore the post made by good-intentioned people that say, I have traveled 16 million miles with my favorite expensive scissors and they've never been taken. Unless that person is willing to reimburse you if you use your favorite scissors, I wouldn't listen to them. And I think, frankly, when people make those statements, they are not being very fair. Number 5, whatever you take, pack a backup pair in your checked luggage so that when you get to your destination, you will definitely have a pair of scissors. Now, so that's all I want to say about scissors. And it's not anything new. I've mentioned all this before. When you're picking your travel project, keep it simple. This is not the time to bring something on 28-inch scroll bars that have, 90 different colors of silk, and each one of them you're doing like 3 or 4 stitches before you're changing color. That's not a good travel project. So keep it simple. Think about how much time do you realistically have to stitch, counting the time that, nowadays we have to get to the airport so much earlier than we did, back in the day. And we're used to that. So let's say you tell yourself, well, I'm going to have an hour and a half between when I go through that TSA checkpoint and my flight's called. I'm probably going to have about an hour and a half. It's a 3-hour flight. I have a layover of blah, blah, blah amount of time. Add all that up and say to yourself, okay, realistically, if I am able to stitch every minute of that time, I'm going to have 4.5 or 5 hours of stitching time. What should I take? What can you realistically get done in that amount of time? So just, pare it down and bring what is a realistic project and a realistic amount of work to get done at that time. This is where you also might say, if you're working on a sampler, well, in that amount of time, I might, be working on this part of the sampler. So make a photocopy of that part of the chart and just bring that part of the chart with you. Just bring the colors that you need for that part. Just keep it simple. And make sure, whatever you do, that you have your contact information in your project bag. Phone number, if you're willing to have that out there, your email address, whatever. If you should leave it behind and a good Samaritan should happen to find it, make it easy for them to get in touch with you to put it back into your loving arms. And with that in mind, please, 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 please don't use a food storage Ziploc bag for that travel project. Too often, that left behind on a seat in a waiting area, the cleaning crew comes through and they say, oh, this looks like trash, and they toss it. So it's precious to you, so present it in such a way that shows it has value. And that means put it in something. It doesn't have to be an expensive project bag. It can be something simple, but not just a normal food Ziploc bag, please. Do yourself a favor. And speaking of travel, we have our long-awaited, this has been 5 or 6 years in the making, our plans to have a Stitchers Escapes cruise that's going to sail all the way around Great Britain. And this will be in the summer of 2024. So we're not taking registrations yet, but if you have even the slightest interest in that cruise, I really recommend that you get on our mailing list, and I'll share a screenshot of what to look for. Just go to the stitchersescapes.com website, and then if you go to contact us, and then you scroll down just a little bit, there'll be a place that will say subscribe to our newsletter, and just fill that out. What we're going to do with this cruise is kind of give first dibs to the people who got bumped because it was canceled in both 2020 and 2022. So now that we're doing it in 2024, we figured that to be fair, we need to give those people a chance first. But a couple weeks after the main after that early registration opens, the main registration will open, and that's when it'll be beneficial to be on that mailing list. Real quick thing. People have asked me, is Cosmo floss color fast? And the short answer to that is yes. And by the way, I am way behind in this, like months behind, but there are all kinds of new colors that have been introduced in the Cosmo line, and I'm going to be adding them to my Etsy store this week. They'll be bundled together, but they are absolutely luscious, and I just can't wait to be stitching with them. And last but not least, the myth that will not die about stitching over two, that you have to start by a vertical thread. And I don't know how many times I need to say this, that it's just not true. There are a couple things that will not happen. Your stitch will not come undone. Your stitch will not slip behind your linen thread. Whether you start by a vertical thread or a horizontal thread, your stitches will work. And can you tell? It makes me crazy. Now, once you've decided which way you want to stitch, it's a wonderful tool. If you're starting by a horizontal thread, and you're stitching over two, then all your stitches start by a horizontal thread. If you're starting by a vertical thread, then you start by a vertical thread throughout that piece. So yes, it's a very, very good tool to be able to keep your stitches every, over two, especially when you're counting over a space. Let's say you have a stitch and then you've got 8 empty spaces, and so you've got 16 threads there. Counting the vertical or the horizontal thread does make it easier to get over to where you want to stitch again. And I, as many years as I've been stitching, there are times I've caught myself that I'm starting in the opposite place, and I notice it right away and can fix it. So it is a good tool to keep that over two thing going, but it's not mandatory that you start with one way or the other. The other thing too that I've recently read, again on my favorite place, Facebook, was that one of the reasons, and this person was very specific, they had a big long post about it, that one of the reasons to start by a vertical thread is that square is larger than the other squares. Now think about this. You've got an even weave. I don't care whether it's linen or Lugana or whatever. Let's just say it's 30 threads to the inch. It's 30 threads to the inch this way, 30 threads to the inch this way. The threads are relatively the same size. So how is the space between the threads any different? Mathematically, it makes absolutely no sense to me. But when this person posted this treatise about how you have to start by a vertical thread, everybody piled on. I never thought of that before, but yeah, that makes so much sense. And I'm sitting here at home saying, doesn't make any sense to me. Anyway, but I also want to say that if you always start by a vertical thread, that's fine. That's fine. If you always start by a horizontal thread, that's fine. It just makes me antsy when there are people saying, what it reminds me of? That Dr. Seuss book about the star-bellied something or others. It's like the vertical thread people are saying, you horizontal thread people are wrong. And the horizontal people are saying, you vertical people are wrong. And the bottom line is neither one of them are wrong. You can start either way. Okay. With that in mind, I'm going to tell you goodbye. Stitch happy, stay safe, and I'll see you soon.